नमो भगवते वासुदेवाय नारायणं नमस्कृत्य नरं चैव नरोत्तमं देवीं सरस्वतीं व्यासं ततो जयमुदीरयेत् नष्टप्रायेषु भद्रेषु नित्यं भागवत सेवया भगवती उत्तम श्लोके भक्तिर्भवति नैष्टिकी. So today we are starting new chapter, Canto Srimad Bhagavatam, Canto 4, Chapter 14, the story of King Vena. So last chapter we studied how Maharaj Anga left the kingdom, went to the forest for self-realization because he was so disturbed by the activities of Vena and he could not rectify him. Text 1. Maitreya Vacha Bhrikvadayaste Munyo Lokanam Kshem Darshina Gotaryasati Vairnam Pashyanta Pashu Samyatam. The great sage Maitreya continued, O great hero Vidura, the great sages headed by Bhrigu were always thinking of the welfare of the people in general. When they saw that in the absence of King Anga, there was no one to protect the interests of the people, they understood that without a ruler, the people would become independent and non-regulated. So without a ruler, because Maharaj Anga had left without installing Vena on the throne, and the kingdom was pretty much unregulated, non-regulated. In this verse, the significant word is Kshema Darshina, which refers to those who are always looking after the welfare of people in general. All the great sages headed by Bhrigu were always thinking of how to elevate all the people of the universe to the spiritual platform. Indeed, they advise the kings of every planet to rule the people with that ultimate goal of life in mind. The great sages used to advise the head of the state or the king, and he used to rule the populace in accordance with the instruction. After the disappearance of King Anga, there was no one to follow the instructions of the great sages. Consequently, all the citizens became unruly, so much so that they could be compared to animals. As described in Bhagavad Gita, human society must be divided into 4 orders according to quality and work. In every society, there must be an intelligent class, administrative class, productive class, and worker class. In modern democracy, these scientific divisions are turned topsy-turvy, and by vote, Shudras or workers are chosen for administrative posts. Having no knowledge of the ultimate goal of life, such persons whimsically enact laws without knowledge of life's purpose. The result is that no one is happy. So that time, since Maharaj Anga left, nobody was there to rule over the kingdom, and the kingdom was becoming like it was a chaos. So it was completely unruly. So the sages, because they are there to look after the welfare of the people in general. And sages, as it is said, headed by Bhrigu Muni, they were not there to rule over. They were not there that, okay, nobody is there, so we take over the kingdom. No, they're the real Brahmins. The Brahmins never do that. But and Prabhupada compares it to the modern democracy. Everything is upside down. Shudras, by vote, somehow by hook or by crook, they get the votes and they become the leaders and they lead according to their whims. All they want to do is just enjoy their senses. Nobody wants to serve the public. Serve in the right way means taking them on the path back home, back to Godhead. Nobody, even they themselves don't know, and how can they lead the public in that way? Veer Mataram Ayuya Sunitam Brahmavadina Prakritiya Sammatam Venam Abhyashan Chin Patim Bhuva. The great sages then called for the Queen Mother, Sunita, and with her permission they installed Vena on the throne as a master of the world. All the ministers, however, disagreed with this. So ministers knew the nature of Vena, how cruel he is. But sages had no other option at that time. And they had to install Vena on the throne. Shrutva niripa sangatam venam इति उग्रशासनम निलिल्यर दस्यवः सद्यः सर्पत्रस्ता इवा खवाः. It was already known that Vena was very severe and cruel. Therefore, as soon as all the thieves and rogues in the state heard of his ascendance to the royal throne, they became very much afraid of him. Indeed, they hid themselves here and there as rats hide themselves from snakes. So, although Vena was very cruel, but at the same time, he was cruel for the thieves and rogues also. So they really got scared. When the government is weak, rogues and thieves flourish. Similarly, when the government is very strong, all the thieves and rogues disappear or hide themselves. Of course, Vena was not a very good king, but he was known to be cruel and severe. Thus the state at least became free from thieves and rogues. And the example is given by Matrimony as rats hide themselves from snakes. So that was the situation of the kingdom. Sa arudha nirpasthana unnadho ashtavibhutibhi avamene mahabhagan stabdha sambhavitah swatah. When the king ascended to the throne, he became all powerful with 8 kinds of opulences. Consequently, he became too proud. By virtue of his false prestige, he considered himself to be greater than anyone. Thus he began to insult great personalities. In this verse, the word Ashtavibhutibhi, meaning by 8 opulences, is very important. The king is supposed to possess 8 kinds of opulences. By dint of mystic yoga practice, kings generally acquired these 8 opulences. These kings were called Rajarishis, kings who were also great sages. By practicing mystic yoga, Rajarishi could become smaller than the smallest, greater than the greatest, and could get whatever he desired. A Rajarishi could also create a kingdom, bring everyone under his control, and rule everyone. These were some of the opulences of a king. King Vena, however, was not practiced in yoga, but he became very proud of his royal position nonetheless. Because he was not very considerate, he began to misuse his power and insult great personalities. So although he was powerful and there were no rogues and thieves in his kingdom, but because he was not rightly disposed and very cruel, so even he started insulting great personalities also. He was very proud of his powers, proud of his position. So that's what happens when a wrong person gets a power. It is said that absolute power corrupts absolutely. And so this is what happened with Vena. And he became more and more cruel. Eva madanda utsikto nirankush iva dvipaha paretan ratham asthaya kampayaneva rodasi. When he became overly blind due to his opulences, King Vena mounted a chariot and, like an uncontrolled elephant, began to travel through the kingdom, causing the sky and earth to tremble wherever he went. So much of his terror was there all over the earth, all over his kingdom. Na yashtavyam na datavyam na hotavyam dvija kvachit iti naya varya dharmam bheri ghoshena sarvasha. All the twice-born Brahmins were forbidden henceforth to perform any sacrifice, and they were also forbidden to give charity or offer clarified butter. Thus King Vena sounded kettle drums throughout the countryside. In other words, he stopped all kinds of religious rituals. What was committed by King Vena many years ago is at present being carried out by atheistic governments all over the world. The world situation is so tense that at any moment, governments may issue declarations to stop religious rituals. Eventually, the world situation will become so degraded that it will be impossible for pious men to live on the planet. Therefore, sane people should execute Krishna consciousness very seriously so that they can go back home, back to Godhead, without having to further suffer the miserable conditions predominant in this universe. So King Vena, very powerful. So although he stopped all thieves and rogues, but at the same time he stopped the sacrifices also. He said no more sacrifices, no more charity, no more offering of ghee in the yajna. So that was not at all good. But being he was just blind with the power he had, power of the king. And this is what Prabhupada is saying. At any moment, governments at this age may issue declarations to stop religious rituals. And it happens. It happens. So many places all over the world. They just stop. Stop. Maybe like ISKCON devotees, if they want to take out Harinam, governments don't allow. No temple worship, no preaching, no Harinam, nothing. That's what Prabhupada is saying. So sane people, those who have some intelligence left, they should execute Krishna consciousness very seriously so that they can go back home, back to Godhead, before the situation becomes even worse. Venasya munyo durvritasya vicheshtitam vimrishya lok vyasanam tripyochuhusma satrina. Therefore, all the great sages assembled together and after observing cruel Vena's atrocities, concluded that a great danger and catastrophe was approaching the people of the world. Thus, out of compassion, they began to talk amongst themselves for the performance of the sacrifices. So the sages themselves, they had put Vena on the throne, although the ministers opposed it. But now they themselves were stopped from performing the sacrifices. This is a weird situation. Before King Vena was enthroned, all the great sages were very much anxious to see to the welfare of the society. When they saw that King Vena was most irresponsible, cruel, and atrocious, they again began to think of the welfare of the people. It should be understood that sages, saintly persons, and devotees are not unconcerned with the people's welfare. So normally we quote that verse that putting the water at the root of the tree, all the different elements of the tree, like the branches, fruit, flowers, leaves, they all get watered. But that doesn't mean we should not look after the branches and the leaves and the flowers and the fruits, or we should not protect them, or should we just cut down the branches or the fruits, flowers, leaves. That it doesn't mean that. So sometimes we hide behind that shloka. Oh, we are just watering the root of the tree, and that is what the shloka says. No, we have to take care of the whole plant also. Of course, it doesn't mean we start watering the leaves and the flowers and fruits. That doesn't mean that. But it certainly doesn't mean we don't take care of the plant. Just because we are watering the root. So this is what Prabhupada is saying. It should be understood that sages, saintly persons, and devotees are not unconcerned with the people's welfare. Ordinary karmis are busy acquiring money for sense gratification, and ordinary jnanis are socially aloof when they speculate on liberation. But actual devotees and saintly persons are always anxious to see how the people can be made happy, both materially and spiritually. Therefore, the great sages began to consult one another on how to get out of the dangerous atmosphere created by King Vena. So the people have to live happily both materially and spiritually, and that's a system, Varnashram system. That's what Krishna has given. If we follow that properly. Aho ubhyatah praptam lokasya vyasanam mahat darunya ubhyato deepte iv taskara palayo. When the great sages consulted one another, they saw that the people were in dangerous position from both directions. When a fire blazes on both ends of a log, the ants in the middle are in a very dangerous situation. Similarly, at that time, the people in general were in a dangerous position due to an irresponsible king on one side and thieves and rogues on the other. So the example is given of a log of wood. If the fire is there on both ends, then the ants who are in the middle, where would they go? So similarly, the people in general. So if there is no king, then thieves and rogues are there to bother them. And if the king is like Vena is there, then thieves won't bother them, but the king himself is very cruel. So what to do? So the great sages consulted one another. Arayak bhayadesh krito rajata darhana tato apyasid bhayam tvadya katham syat swasti dehinam. Thinking to save the state from irregularity, the sages began to consider that it was due to political crisis that they made Vena king, although he was not qualified. But alas, now the people were being disturbed by the king himself. Under such circumstances, how could the people be happy? In Bhagavad Gita, it is stated that even in the renounced order, one should not give up sacrifice, charity, and penance. The brahmacharis must perform sacrifices, the grahasthas must give in charity, and those in the renounced order of life, the vanprasthas and sannyasis, must practice penance and austerities. These are the procedures by which everyone can be elevated to the spiritual platform. When the sages and saintly persons saw that King Vena had stopped all these functions, they became concerned about the people's progress. Saintly people preach God consciousness or Krishna consciousness because they are anxious to save the general populace from the dangers of animalistic life. There must be a good government to see that the citizens are actually executing their religious rituals, and thieves and rogues must be curbed. When this is done, the people can advance peacefully in spiritual consciousness and make their lives successful. So this is a job of the devotees or sages to make sure that the people are not following the animalistic life, but they're following properly their spiritual life as well. Actually, it's the job of the government, but if government is not doing, then saints, sages, they have to do it. Aherev paya posha poshak kasyapya anartha brit vena prakritya khala sunitha garva sambhava. The sages began to think within themselves. Because he was born from the womb of Sunitha, King Vena is by nature very mischievous. Supporting this mischievous king is exactly like maintaining a snake with milk. Now he has become a source of all difficulties. Saintly persons are generally aloof from social activities in the materialistic way of life. King Vena was supported by the saintly persons just to protect the citizens from the hands of rogues and thieves. But after his ascendance to the throne, he became a source of trouble to the sages. Saintly people are especially interested in performing sacrifices and austerities for the advancement of spiritual life. But Vena, instead of being obliged because of saints' mercy, turned out to be their enemy because he prohibited them from executing their ordinary duties. A serpent who is maintained with milk and banana simply stores poison in his teeth and awaits the day to bite his master. So King Vena was again compared to a snake. And if the sages, they were supporting and they were supporting, they installed him on the throne, but now King Vena, after becoming so powerful, he stopped the sages themselves from performing the sacrifices and austerities. So this definitely was not approved by the sages. Nirupitah prajapala sajigansati ve praja tathapi santveya mamam nas manstat patakam sprishet. We appointed this Vena king of the state in order to give protection to the citizens, but now he has become the enemy of the citizens. Despite all these discrepancies, we should at once try to pacify him. By doing so, we may not be touched by the sinful results caused by him. So they are still thinking of there's a pacify him means going and try to talk to him and give him the good counsel so he can rectify his mistakes. So they are talking among themselves. The saintly kings, the saintly sages, elected King Vena to become king, but he proved to be mischievous. Therefore, the sages were very much afraid of incurring sinful reaction. So karma is so hard to understand and so hard to get away with. Now, sages have nothing to do with how King Vena was behaving. They were not behaving sinfully. But because they had put him on the throne, they were afraid that they will get the sinful reaction. And because this man, King Vena, was not acting properly. So sages would also get implicated in that reaction. The law of karma prohibits a person even to associate with the mischievous individual. By electing Vena to the throne, the saintly sages certainly associated with him. Ultimately, King Vena became so mischievous that the saintly sages actually became afraid of being contaminated by his activities. Thus, before taking any action against him, the sages tried to pacify and correct him so that he might turn from his mischief. So, very, very important for us to understand how the law of karma works. Anything that we do, it can go against us, even though we are not actively doing it. We are still responsible. Tadvid vadbhir asadvrito veno asmabhi krito nirpaha santvito yadino vacham na grihesya atidhar adharmakrit lokadhikkara sandagdam daheshyama sutejasa. The saintly sages continued thinking, of course, we are completely aware of his mischievous nature, yet nevertheless we enthroned Vena. If we cannot persuade King Vena to accept our advice, he will be condemned by the public and we will join them. Thus, by our prowess, we shall burn him to ashes. Saintly persons are not interested in political matters, yet they are always thinking of the welfare of the people in general. Consequently, they sometimes have to come down to the political field and take steps to correct the misguided government or royalty. However, in Kali Yuga, saintly persons are not as powerful as they previously were. They used to be able to burn any sinful man to ashes by virtue of their spiritual prowess. Now, saintly persons have no such power due to the influence of the age of Kali. Indeed, the Brahmins do not even have the power to perform sacrifices in which animals are put into a fire to attain a new life. Under these circumstances, instead of actively taking part in politics, saintly persons should engage in chanting the Maha Mantra, Hare Krishna. By the grace of Lord Chaitanya, by simply chanting this Hare Krishna Maha Mantra, the general populace can derive all benefits without political implications. But in Treta Yuga, when this incident happened, the sages were very much involved in taking care of the kingdom through the king. And now they were feeling they're responsible. And they're talking among themselves. If he still doesn't listen to us, we'll burn him through to ashes by our powers. Because they were very powerful sages. Later on, we'll read about a story of how this king Trishanku, Vishwamitra sent him to moon by his Brahm Tejas, and Indra sent him back down. He said, he's not qualified. And Vishwamitra again sent him, and Indra sent him back. So now he got stuck in the middle. He's not on the moon, he's not on the earth, he's in the middle somewhere. But this was the power of Vishwamitra Muni. So similarly, Bhrigu Muni and other sages here are very, very powerful. And they will end up burning King Vena to ashes. Eva madhyavasayana munyo godmanyavah upavrijya brvanvenam santvitva cha samabhi. The great sages, having thus decided, approached King Vena, concealed their real anger, they pacified him with sweet words, and then spoke as follows. So tomorrow we'll study what the sages said. We'll stop here, see anybody has any question or comment.
Hare Krishna, Prabhuji.
Hare Krishna.
So, Prabhuji, I think atheist government, which you talked about here, I mean, it's mentioned here. Yeah, I feel the similarity in the Nepal Prime Minister, Mr. Oli. He talks about Sri Ram was born there in Nepal and not in Ayodhya, and he just confuses everybody.
And he himself is confused.
Exactly. And then there are few, what to say, like in our country itself, there are people who also preaches, like that wherever Kaushalya Mata was and Shriram, where all Shriram was born, what is the evidence and all. So notorious thinking.
Few years back,
I'm sure you might have.
They even doubted the bridge that was built by Ram. And actually they wanted the ships to go through that, and they would have made money out of that. So they're just crazy.
Yeah.
And they say, oh, where did Ram get the civil engineering degree from building such a bridge? Ram doesn't need any degree. What to do? These are atheistic, completely atheistic people.
And Prabhuji, by this story, the descendant of Dhruva Maharaj, Dhruva was such a big devotee and such a descendant like Veena. Nobody can expect it, like, because I think Utkal was the son of Dhruva Maharaj, right? He was so he's a big time devotee. He's Utkal or Uttam, Prabhuji? I think.
Utkal.
And then Anga, Utkal, and then King Anga, just the father of Veena. He was also very nice. But then,
Yeah, so anything can happen.
But Veena become like this.
Look at Prahlad Maharaj. He was born in the house of Hiranyakashipu. So anything can happen.
Yeah.
So all we have to do is try to become a serious, sincere devotee. That's all.
Absolutely, bro.
Okay. So
Thank you so much.
Thank you, brother. We can stop here. You all have a wonderful and safe day. Hare Krishna. Jai Shri Ram.
Thank you so much, Prabhuji.
Thank you so much,
Thank you so much, Prabhuji.